All right, let's talk about some tips and tricks about writing music and stuff like that. And obviously, this is going to become incredibly important, and we're going to be talking more about it a little bit later on and showing you how to do some recordings and stuff. And this becomes even more important because it becomes a training platform for you to hit the next level in terms of musicianship without being able to write complex forms of music. And I don't mean write them down, I just mean play them and sort of like remember your ideas and play them back kind of situation and use them as a library to build up your skills and repertoire. You're missing out on a huge part of sort of the the education process. Look at all the masters, that all they ever did was write music, and so you have to too. So we're going to talk about some tips and tricks here about how to maximize stuff. First off, let's cover the basics. We're working in the key of C major, right? And you can see there's this interval structure for the step pattern. The whole step here, whole step, half, whole, half. Get back to the start, right? There's the octave, right? And then of course the scale, the Ionian mode. I can start to move up to the next region, right? Dorian. Oh, Phrygian, of course. When I move from the third degree back to the third degree, fourth. And when I do that, look, if I was doing this Lydian mode, from the fourth note to the fourth note, I'm like whole. Oh, well, that's different than whole, half. So if I wanted C Lydian, because 4 is the, fourth degree is also a major, essentially, I can now do the 3 whole steps. There's a whole step, there's a whole step, there's a whole step. Now that's going to become incredibly important, that note. Later on, of course, the flat and 7 from the Mixolydian. Classic dominant 7 flavor there. Of course, the lowered third is another one, but that's another day. We're just going to concentrate on those ones because they're the most useful right out of the gate. Of course, a sharp 5 is also pretty cool too, or a flat 6. Again, knowing these interval structures, right, that's a whole step and stuff, and that's a half step. That's obviously a huge one. And then, of course, just working on the intervals themselves. If this is the anchor note, right, from the scale, well, I can play it in reference to all the other ones, right? There's the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and back to the octave. There's the minor 7th, right? The minor 6th or the augmented 5th, diminished 5th, the minor 3rd, the minor 2nd, right? There's another minor 2nd, minor 2nd. You have to basically, that's major 2nd. That's the minor 2nd. It's like the Mike Myers chord. Fleet. So, I mean, that's how it kind of works, is you have to really sort of focus in on the little tiny minutia. But once you get that down, and of course you start to flesh out these regions, right? You can be like, there's the 3rd, there's the triad, there's the dominant 7, right? And you can be like, there's the inversions. Or for the dominant 7 stuff, right? And of course, major. Right, so you could do diminish. Diminish is so badass, man. Honestly, once you get used to it, you're just like, I can't even believe I lived without that for so long. It's a really, really great flavor. Don't skip over it. Obviously, dominant 7. So there's lots of really, really juicy flavors in there that you can be harvesting, and I recommend that you do. And then, of course, understand the basic sort of structure where you have a root note that defines a region. There's the Ionian region, there's the Phrygian region, there's the Mixolydian region, there's the Locrian region. Right, you have those flavors essentially built in there, they're inherent, and of course I can take that and start to apply back. Oh, I need a half step, right? And then of course you're going to be off to the races. And that can be, of course, immediately useful, because once you see, if I play this C major chord here, and then I play the 4th degree, well, that's an avoid situation, because that just sounds like shiatsu, obviously. But as soon as I go and raise the 4th from the Lydian mode, because I took this scale here and I related it back here, because any of the 1st, the 4th, or the 5th degree can be considered a major, because major triads are built off each one, meaning a major third to a minor third. There's a major third and a minor third, major third, minor third, and of course, right? So when you get to that far, you can be like, oh, I can now, or here it is in its natural F, right? In this case, when you're talking about G Lydian, there's the 4 with, of course, the F sharp now. Those are all the same scale, Lydian, but I'm applying it to F, I'm applying it to C, and I'm applying it to G, right? G Lydian, the raised 4, and the F sharp from its 7th degree. The F Lydian, where it happens just normally from the C major scale, and of course related back to C major. And those would obviously be important, because those notes can be drawn from later on when you want to be like, okay, I've got this. There's one I'm borrowing, of course, from the Lydian mode now in the Mixolydian position there. I know you're just like, what did you just say? Get out of here. So that right there is, I'm going to stop right there. But obviously you're defining a region, and you can either relate that information back here and sneak those notes into your regular chord progression, right? That could be the same one you're doing here from the 4th degree down to the okay, so there's a classic there. That's me doing the F major to the F minor. That's a first inversion of another minor triad that lets me move to the C major to resolve the juiciness of that. But of course, it just acts as a cadence, right? So that's another big one, is the idea that these chords basically have to blend together in terms of cadences. So that you've got like the C major moving to like the G major, moving to the F major, to moving to the C major, moving to the G major, F major, and then okay, so that's just me going from the 1 chord to the 5 chord to the 4 chord to the 1 chord to the 5 chord to the 4 chord to the 1 chord to the 5 chord to the 4 chord to the 1 chord. Okay, and you can use that a lot, obviously, when you have this here. Now that's one of the finest examples of what I call musical gravity. You have this interval structure where I took this F and moved it to the bottom here. And that basically pulls out. Okay, so those notes pull away from each other. So when you play the chord, obviously, throw in a bass note there, obviously, and you're good to go, right? And you can even play the G here, probably with this B minor, right? And then, of course, and okay, so not only are you getting the 5-1 here in the bass, but now you're substituting in this diminished flavor, because look, that just basically comes from this G7 chord. Okay, there's the B diminished right there to set up the cadence. And then when I do it from here, obviously, you get insta magic. Okay, so that's what I'm talking about. The magic happens when you start to realize you're like G major and B diminished combined together form G major or G7, sorry. Yeah, nice. G7, right? So I can use that. Whenever I play G in the bass, I can layer these B diminished chords going down, right? Oh, I gotta take this F and lower it. Lower it again. Right, come on, that's as old as the hills. And so that's where that becomes, instead of just layering in the B, right? And of course you can use the B too. And then, see what I mean? You can then create movement by moving from the really heavy-duty diminished flavor to slightly resolved to the nice 5-1 resolution there. Okay, so incredibly important. Let's talk about neighboring chords. If I'm playing this C here, well, the next one obviously is going to be either the E minor here, which is up above and making the C major 7 chord here, or I can go down to the A minor, okay, which gives me A minor 7 because there's the C major triad. So that's really important. You can use that to extend out things before moving to something else, right? Oops, sorry. Now here's the thing. It's because I was thinking, okay, I don't want to go to this one here. I really want to go to this. This is another one of these things, like the C major triad with the F. You gotta, we're going to talk about factoring in this D major in a second here, but you got to do that extension there. Essentially the same thing when you're playing this F in the bass, especially when it's the 4th degree of whatever scale you're working in this case C, right? I really prefer when you stretch it out to the extension chord, so you don't play the root, you go to the 3rd, the 5th, or the 7th. This one, obviously, jumping down. That's great stuff right there, of course. And if you got the, by moving this down, it just gives you a much better resolution. You see, the tension is increased from this simple plagal cadence to something much more extreme, right? So again, much richer. And that's the whole point there, is once you understand that you can start to factor in these other chords and just mess with their inversions. There's the A, of course, then moving down to this inversion, move down to this inversion. That's cage stuff on the guitar. That's just basic cage stuff. And then basically just layering one note or two underneath it. It depends on how good you are. And you can even do it with a bass note kind of situation if you wanted to, and just play the actual triads and the inversions. Just program it in. That's what we're going to look at. So you can be like, look, I can do some pretty awesome stuff. I know what all the bass notes are going to be for this entire passage. And so when I practice my rhythms, you know, I'm starting with the C here as the bass notes, right? So you might be like, I want to get saucy here. I want to sort of change it up. So I might be the G over top of it, right? Which lets me go 5-1. And then to the extension. Now, obviously, that one's not very good there. I just want to move this here. See that transition? Or, and then boom. That makes all the difference in the world, right? So again, these extension ones, and they can be used for chord progressions too. If I start here with this C major 7, jump down a 3rd, A minor 7, F major 7. D minor 7 into C major. Right, so very, very, very useful skill going up. Into the G now, look. I'm taking that F so I can play this G7 in the third inversion, which lets me now jump in with the B. Right, because that'll help me move from the G7 to the B. Then I can move to the C over A minor. And of course you can add it on top as a 6 up there if you want. Nah, not my favorite there, obviously. Also, a little more dense there, and that's just it. Again, cadence down, right, from 4 to 1. But I just kind of sort of, I shouldn't have messed around too much there, but I did. So sue me, send me your complaint in the in the comment section below. But that's really what your, you know, the broadest strokes, if you will, is the idea that the chords, they move. And of course you can use complementary ones, and by extending the range of the bass, the 7 there. And then of course the E minor, why not add in this Lydian here? Now you see that one there doesn't quite work, but if I were to say maybe do the 7th and then do this D major here like this, much better, right? So you can also get it in there. Musical gravity though, see, it pulls up immediately. Just enough tension to sort of get it out of there. It doesn't mean you can't do it per se. But you want to land on one of these stronger notes, you see that, to sort of like make sure your idea doesn't get too obscene. And of course, again, by arpeggiating something like that, instead of playing the full chord, boom, another. Listen, does it really matter whether you strum the chord or you play the arpeggio? And that's just it. When you're like, I want to really take it to the extreme now, instead of just doing this here or doing an extension on it, or even possibly doing a more fancy chord, I really want to take it up a notch and be like, yeah, I want to really get into that. But then you're like, doesn't sound as good as... You see what I mean? There's this little evolution with respect to solving the conundrum of being like, that doesn't sound that great. That's getting better. That's not so bad. And you could be maybe getting rid of this one that's clashing. So you're mirroring these ones here, right, in the chord. And you'll be doing this on the guitar too. You might be just using this note, or maybe using this one. Stretched out. It's a pretty nice one too. Again, getting into the darker, more diminished flavors there, but ultimately this idea that you can keep incrementing the interval structure, or keeping the triad the same and increasing the bass, or decreasing it. Obviously, all of those sort of motions matter, and of course breaking up the chord. at a moment there. So there it is. That's it for the lesson. Essentially, is just try to understand, spread these things out. You can get way more mileage, or use them stacked together. Go from here to be like, oh, I can do the A now instead of here. And there's the G, right? So you can be like, okay, I'll just do the G down here. So now I got all from just one position here, right? Done deal, right? Start factoring in some of the more exotic ones. Now that might sound bizarre to you when you do stuff like that, but honestly, you have to get used to it. See what I mean? And once you start experimenting like that, I think you'll find that your practice sessions get way more interesting, because you'll be like, oh, thirds here. There's the thirds up here. You'll be like, by just moving them in tandem like that. Or you'll be like, I want to do some chords, but I want to use sevenths as my structure. You'll be like, I'm going to use these third ones. Everything I'm doing is basically spreading out this C major 7, 1, 7, 3, 5, 7, right? Right, so when you're using a 7th in the bass, you're going to use this chord. When you're using a 5th in the bass, you're going to use this one here. Or you're going to use... Oh, that's much better there with the 6th, obviously. Again, always looking for those chords to resolve back down to where it is that you want to. And then, of course, there it is. Okay, so work on them, and of course we're going to look at them with the guitar and stuff like that, but it's first you're like, okay, if I'm playing C major in the bass over E minor, over G major, over A minor, over B diminished, that's quite nice, right? Be like, oh, here's the 4th degree. And now notice when you stack them around the other way, if I put them in reverse, yikes, not so good, but that's not so bad, right? I wish you all the best of luck with your practice sessions. Practice creatively. If you want to, get a keyboard. If you want to sort of get into that stuff, I highly recommend it. VST instruments are cheap. And of course, instead of just obviously following the roots every single time, just look for these new, more interesting sequences instead of going 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. you're now going to or whatever it's going to be, and obviously that's, see, there's the triads for 4. Notice that one, inversion, inversion, inversion there, and then one more time, diminished. You getting that one? Hope the tips help. Break down the fretboard, start to understand these individual sections in intervals, stacking them, triads, dominant 7, and of course, last but not least, the extensions themselves that relate by just building the triad off it afterwards and then layering a bass note. And then try different interval structures. Thirds, fifths, and sevenths obviously are going to make the best choices, and you'll get beautiful chords like that. And your mom will be like, I'm so proud. See you in the next one.